Alright, hello Geometry and Algebra 2. So, since we're getting close to the end of the semester slash year, I didn't want to jump into anything brand new. So I figured we'd do a little bit of something with the trig functions that we've been using, but something that would be, easy to explain via video and could stand on its own pretty well without having to dive into a bunch of other stuff because we're getting close to the end of the year here. So we're looking at triangle area but with trig. So far, we've said that the area of a triangle is half your base times your height, because if we have a triangle, that's really just half a rectangle, and rectangles are length times width, and I should have put the cap back on it. There we go. So if I've got a triangle, it's half of my base times my height, because I could draw this rectangle around it, and this would be half of this rectangle, and this would be half of this rectangle, so half base times height. That's the formula we've been using since 7th grade. Probably a little bit before that. That's the one we're used to seeing. So the question now is, what if we don't have all of those things? What if instead of my base and my height, I have, say, this side, and this side, and let's say that angle? What do I do then? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a little trig function, and we're going to look at this right triangle over here. Now, technically you could do this with either of these right triangles. So we're going to take a look at this right triangle on the left, and if I know this side, this angle, and this side, and I want this, so I want my opposite side. So I want my opposite side, I have my hypotenuse, so that's the so part of SOHCAHTOA. So I'm going to say my sine of this angle, which is C, is my opposite side, which is H, which is kind of weird because we're used to thinking of H as your hypotenuse, but right now it's the height of this triangle, over my hypotenuse, which is A. Okay, so now I'm going to take this, and I'm going to multiply both sides by A. And that gives us our height is A times the sine of C. But we know both A and C. So now we have something we can plug in for H, and we'll be able to find our area. So our area is half of B times, instead of H, we're going to have A times the sine of C. And I shouldn't use capital A, I should write out area. The reason I'm going to write out area is because we also have an angle A over there. So your area is half of B times A, so your side's B, A times the sine of C, and you can actually go through and do this with all three of them. We're not going to go through all three of them, I'm just going to jot these up here. So our area could also be half of AC times the sine of B, or it could be half of BC times the sine of A. So the basic idea is you're taking your two sides and the angle between them and the sine of that. So we have half, two of our sides, sine of the angle between them. And that's another thing we can use to find our area if we happen to not have our base and our height. Now, again, obviously this one only works in very specific circumstances. In order for this one to work, you need two sides and the angle between them. So if you have that, you can use this. If you have your base and your height, you can use the formula we're used to using. Alright. So, then what we're going to do then is we're going to have some triangles, and we're going to find the area. And before we do that, make sure your calculator is in degrees, because if it's not, this will mess all of this up. So take a second, make sure your calculator is in degrees. And I'm assuming that now we're good to go. So we have our two sides and our angle between them. So whether I'm calling this A, B, and C, whatever, our area is going to be half of our two sides. And no, it doesn't matter what order they're in because we're multiplying, so order doesn't matter. Do make sure that you throw in the sine, though. We don't want to take that times 130. We want to take it times the sine of 130. So, big difference there. So make sure you've got the sign of 130, but the sign of 130 is just a number. So go ahead and take the sign of 130, and hopefully you end up with something around 0.766. If you didn't end up with something around 0.766, double check and make sure your calculator is in degrees. If it's not, go ahead and email me and I'll try to help you get your calculator in degrees, but I'm assuming after the last chapter was worth of stuff, you know how to do that by now. Okay. Well, now we're just multiplying. So we're taking that 0.766 times our 5 times our 8 times our 1/2 or 0.5 if you don't like fractions, which gives you about 15.3. Ish. And since we started off in feet, area is going to be in square feet. Feet squared. So that's another way to find the area of a triangle, if you don't have your base and your height, if you have this instead. Alright, let's go through another example. What if I got this? Because we just said in order for that thing to work, we need two sides and the angle between them. Well, we do have two sides, but we don't have the angle between them. But we can find the angle between them. Because triangle angles add up to, hopefully you just said 180. So you take our 180 minus 80 and 45 gives you 125, which gives you 55. And now we have our third angle. Cool. Alright, so now we're going to take that, and then just watch out for, that's the angle we want. So we want 1/2 of our times our two sides times the sine of that one. So this time we have three angles. That's the one we want, because that's the one between our two sides. So the sine of 55. And the sine of 55 gives you about 0.819. If it didn't give you that, double check and make sure your calculator is in degrees. Alright, and then we're going to take that times 22. Times 35 times 1/2, 4.5 if you don't like fractions, which gives about 315. 0.4-ish. Alright, and since we started off in centimeters, we're going to end up in centimeters squared. Alright, one more. We got an isosceles triangle. Alright, so if we got an isosceles triangle, and we have those two sides, if that's 20, that's 20. So again, we have two sides, we have the angle between them, so we're going to take our area equals 1/2 times our 20 times our 20 times the sine of the angle between them, which was 30. And again, just make sure you take the sine of 30, not just plain 30. So the sine of 30 gives you 0.5. I should have known that one off the top of my head. That's 0.5. Alright, and then we got 1/2 times 20 times 20 times 0.5, which should give you 100. Okay, so half of 20 is 10, half of 20 is 10, 10 times 10 is 100. Alright, and if you plug that into your calculator, that's perfectly fine. And since we started off in meters, we're in meters squared. Alright, so that is triangle area with trig. For the homework, there aren't pages out of the book because you're in two separate books. This is actually in both of your books, it just wasn't on the same page. So what I did instead was I made a Google Doc with a couple problems with this. So go ahead and check out the Google Doc in the description below. Do not write in the Google Doc. You shouldn't be able to anyway, but don't write in the Google Doc either. Make a copy of the Google Doc and write in that. So go to File, make a copy, and write in that one, or just write out the answers on a different piece of paper, which will probably be easier anyway than trying to type out squared into either one. You're probably going to end up doing a little bit of work on a different piece of paper anyway, so either of those things is fine, and I'll see you next time.